The morning of June 20th, 2025, dawned over Ahmedabad with a familiar hazy warmth. At Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, the air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and the gentle hum of a city waking up. The first rays of the sun painted the tarmac in soft hues of orange and gold, reflecting off the polished fuselages of aircraft waiting patiently at their gates. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere was a predictable symphony of human activity. Announcements echoed through the halls, their voices calm and measured, calling passengers for flights to Delhi, Mumbai, and distant international shores. The digital display boards flickered with destinations, each one a promise of a new beginning, a family reunion, or a business deal. It was a scene of routine, a perfectly ordinary Friday morning. Among the many departures listed was Air India Flight AI171, a routine domestic service bound for Kochi. The flight was a vital artery in India's vast air network, connecting the industrial heart of Gujarat with the lush coastal beauty of Kerala. For the ground crew, it was just another turnaround. They moved with practiced efficiency, loading baggage, refueling the Airbus A320neo, and running through their pre-flight checklists. There was no sense of foreboding, no hint of the tragedy that was about to unfold. The conversations were mundane, focused on the rising heat of the day and plans for the weekend. The aircraft itself, registered VTCIO, stood gleaming under the morning light, a symbol of modern engineering and the perceived safety of air travel. It was a machine trusted by millions, a vessel of hopes and dreams. The passengers of AI171 began to gather at the boarding gate, a diverse tapestry of Indian life. There were families heading south for a holiday, their children buzzing with an excitement that filled the sterile airport lounge with life. Business professionals, their faces etched with focus, scrolled through emails on their phones, their minds already in meetings yet to happen. Elderly couples, perhaps returning home or visiting relatives, moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. Each person carried with them a unique story, a personal world of concerns, joys, and aspirations. They were strangers united for a few hours by a common itinerary, their individual fates unknowingly intertwined. The boarding call was made, and they filed down the jet bridge, a quiet procession of souls placing their trust in the airline and its crew. Outside, the air traffic controllers in the tower orchestrated the complex ballet of takeoffs and landings. Their voices, transmitted over radio waves, were the unseen threads weaving the fabric of airport operations. The weather was clear, with light winds and excellent visibility. A perfect day for flying. There were no warnings, no red flags, no meteorological phenomena to cause alarm. The entire system, from the baggage handlers on the ground to the controllers in the tower, was operating as it was designed to. It was this very normality, this deep-seated belief in the reliability of the system, that made the events to follow so profoundly shocking. The calm of that Ahmedabad morning was a fragile veneer, about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. In the cockpit of Flight AI171 sat two experienced pilots, men who had dedicated their lives to the sky. Captain Arav Sharma, a veteran with over 15,000 flying hours, was known for his calm demeanor and meticulous attention to detail. He was a mentor to many younger pilots, a steady hand who had navigated countless challenging situations with grace. Beside him was First Officer Priya Menon, a rising star in the airline with a sharp mind and a passion for aviation that was infectious. She had recently been promoted to the A320neo fleet and saw this flight as another step in her promising career. Together, they represented the best of Air India, their combined experience a reassuring presence at the helm of the advanced aircraft. They conducted their pre-flight checks with the quiet confidence of true professionals. The cabin was a microcosm of India's vibrant diversity. Among the 168 passengers was the Mehta family, traveling to Kerala for a long-awaited vacation. Mr. and Mrs. Mehta were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary, and their two teenage children were excited to see the backwaters for the first time. In another row sat a group of software engineers from a Bengaluru-based tech firm, returning home after a project meeting in Ahmedabad. They chatted animatedly, their conversation a mix of technical jargon and weekend plans. An elderly woman, traveling alone to visit her son and his family, clutched a small bag of homemade sweets, a gift for her grandchildren. Each passenger was a world unto themselves, their presence on the flight a matter of chance and circumstance. One of the youngest passengers traveling alone was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a 21-year-old engineering student. He was returning home to Kochi after a successful internship at a leading automotive company in Gujarat. Bright, ambitious, and full of life, Vishwash was on the cusp of a brilliant future. He had just confirmed his acceptance into a master's program at a prestigious university abroad. He had called his parents the night before, his voice brimming with excitement and pride. He settled into his window seat, 24A, and pulled out a book, eager to get lost in its pages during the 2-hour flight. He was a son, a friend, a promising young mind, his journey home filled with the sweet anticipation of sharing his good news. The cabin crew, led by Senior Purser Anjali Desai, moved through the aisles with warm smiles, their professionalism a comforting balm for any nervous flyers. They demonstrated the safety procedures, their movements synchronized and familiar, a ritual performed thousands of times a day in aircraft all over the world. They helped passengers stow their luggage, offered a kind word to an anxious child, and ensured everyone was settled comfortably for the journey. They were the human face of the airline, the guardians of safety and comfort in the cabin. As the cabin doors were sealed and the aircraft began its pushback from the gate, the lives of these 174 souls, 168 passengers and 6 crew members were now bound together, their shared destiny sealed within the aluminum tube of Flight AI171. The Airbus. A 320neo operating as Flight AI171 was one of the most technologically advanced single-aisle aircraft in the world. Its NEO designation, standing for New Engine Option, promised greater fuel efficiency and a smaller environmental footprint. Airlines across the globe, including Air India, had embraced it as the workhorse of their domestic and short-haul international fleets, but beneath its sleek exterior and inside its sophisticated fly-by-wire systems, a critical flaw lay dormant. This flaw was not a mechanical defect, a loose bolt, or a cracked wing. It was a digital ghost, a bug buried deep within the millions of lines of code that govern the aircraft's flight control systems, a silent and invisible threat waiting for a specific set of circumstances to awaken. Just weeks earlier, a new software patch for the Flight Augmentation Computer, or FAC, had been rolled out by the manufacturer. The update, designated FAC v3.05b, was intended to optimize rudder control during certain phases of flight and improve fuel consumption calculations. It was considered a minor routine update. Air India's maintenance division had installed it across their A320neo fleet as per the manufacturer's service bulletin. The process was seamless, executed overnight by certified technicians who simply followed the digital installation guide. There were no warnings or special instructions, no indication that it had not been as rigorously tested. The digital supply chain, from the programmer to the pilot, operated on a foundation of trust that this code was flawless. The hidden problem within FAC v3.05b was subtle and deeply technical. It created a potential conflict between the FAC and the primary flight computers. Specifically, the new code could, under a rare combination of atmospheric conditions and specific pilot inputs during the takeoff roll, misinterpret sensor data from the nose wheel steering. This misinterpretation would lead the FAC to believe the aircraft was veering off the runway, causing it to command a series of unnecessary and aggressive rudder adjustments. It was a digital hiccup, a logical error that would remain completely invisible during all standard pre-flight checks and simulations. The pilots, Captain Sharma and First Officer Menon, had no way of knowing about this latent defect. Their training was extensive, but it prepared them for known mechanical or system failures, not for a scenario where the aircraft's own brain would actively work against them based on faulty logic. The system was designed to prevent pilots from making mistakes, a concept known as flight envelope protection. On this day, however, the protector was about to become the aggressor. The ghost in the machine was waiting for its cue, a confluence of events that would turn a state-of-the-art aircraft into an uncontrollable force, transforming a routine departure into a desperate fight for survival. At 7:45 a.m., Air India Flight AI171 received clearance for takeoff from runway 23. Captain Sharma's voice was calm as he acknowledged the instruction from air traffic control. Cleared for takeoff, runway 23, Air India 171. First Officer Menon advanced the thrust levers, and the powerful engines spooled up with a deafening roar that echoed across the airfield. The A320neo began its powerful acceleration down the long strip of asphalt. Inside the cabin, passengers were pressed back into their seats by the force of the acceleration. For a few brief moments, everything was perfectly normal. The aircraft was behaving as expected, gathering speed for its ascent into the clear morning sky. As the aircraft reached a critical speed, just before the point of rotation where the pilot would lift the nose, the dormant software bug awakened. A slight crosswind, combined with a minuscule standard rudder pedal input from Captain Sharma to maintain the centerline, triggered the fatal flaw in the FACVI 3.05b software. The computer misinterpreted the data, believing the plane was in a dangerous skid. In the cockpit, the first sign of trouble was an unexpected and violent yawing motion. The nose of the aircraft began to swerve from side to side, a terrifying oscillation that grew in intensity with each passing second. On the flight displays, contradictory warnings began to flash, overwhelming the pilots with a cascade of alerts. Captain Sharma, a man of immense experience, fought to control the aircraft. His instincts told him to use the rudder pedals to counteract the sway, but his actions were being misinterpreted and exacerbated by the faulty software. The plane was fighting its own pilot. "What's happening?" First Officer Menon asked, her voice tight with alarm as she scanned the instruments. The autopilot, which should have engaged, repeatedly disconnected. The fly-by-wire system, designed to be a safety net, was now the source of the chaos. The aircraft lifted off the ground, not in a smooth, controlled climb, but in a clumsy, unstable stagger, its wings rocking violently. It was barely airborne, struggling for altitude and stability just meters above the ground. The aircraft managed to climb to a mere 400 feet, but it was a wounded beast. It veered sharply to the left, away from its intended flight path, its nose pointing directly towards the densely populated residential area of Megani Nagar, which bordered the airport. The pilots wrestled with the controls, but the computer's flawed logic was now in a feedback loop, issuing rudder commands that made recovery impossible. The wings banked at a perilous angle. In the cabin, there was terror. The world outside the windows tilted impossibly. The roar of the engines was joined by the sound of screams. The final communication from the cockpit was a desperate, clipped transmission from Captain Sharma. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. AI171, we have a control problem." Seconds later, the transmission went silent. The end came with devastating speed. At 7:49 in the morning, just 4 minutes after it began its takeoff roll, Air India Flight AI171 plunged into the heart of Megani Nagar. The Airbus A320neo, heavy with jet fuel, clipped the roof of a 3-story apartment building before slamming into a small, open market area. The impact was cataclysmic. A massive fireball erupted into the morning sky, a roiling column of black smoke and orange flame that was visible for miles. The sound of the explosion was a deafening boom that shook buildings across Ahmedabad, shattering windows and sending a shockwave of panic through the city. What was moments ago a bustling neighborhood was transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror and destruction. The first responders were the residents of Megani Nagar themselves. Dazed and terrified, they ran from their homes, not away from the danger, but towards it, driven by a primal instinct to help. They faced a vision of hell. The market was an inferno, with debris from the aircraft and shattered buildings strewn across a wide area. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of burning fuel, and the dust of pulverized concrete. The sounds were a horrifying mix of crackling flames, the hiss of ruptured gas lines, and the cries of the injured and dying. In the minutes before official help could arrive, ordinary citizens became heroes, pulling survivors from the wreckage and trying to douse the flames with buckets of water. As fire trucks and ambulances raced to the scene, their sirens wailing, they struggled to navigate the narrow, debris-choked streets. The scale of the disaster was overwhelming. The crash had not only claimed the lives of those on the plane, but also people on the ground who were just starting their day. The rescue effort was a desperate and chaotic race against time. Firefighters battled the intense blaze while rescue teams searched for signs of life amidst the twisted metal and smoldering ruins. It was a painstaking and heartbreaking task. For every person they managed to pull from the wreckage, they found many more who had not survived. The crash site was a scar, a wound torn into the fabric of the city. Amidst the devastation, a miracle occurred. A rescue worker, sifting through a section of the aircraft's fuselage that had been thrown clear of the main impact zone, heard a faint moan. Pinned beneath a row of seats, but partially shielded by the wreckage, was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh. He was unconscious, severely injured, with burns and multiple fractures, but he was alive. The rescue team worked frantically but carefully to extricate him, a delicate operation that took nearly an hour. As they carried him on a stretcher to a waiting ambulance, his survival became a tiny, flickering candle of hope in an ocean of darkness. He would later be identified as the sole survivor of Air India Flight AI171, a young man who had inexplicably passed through the fire and emerged on the other side. News of the crash spread like wildfire. The initial reports were confused and contradictory, but the images of the thick black smoke billowing over Ahmedabad told an undeniable truth. A national tragedy was unfolding on live television. In newsrooms across the country, regular programming was interrupted for rolling coverage. On social media, the hashtag AI171 began to trend, a torrent of shock, grief, and speculation. The nation, from the corridors of power in New Delhi to the smallest villages, was united in a state of collective horror. The Prime Minister's office issued a statement expressing deep sorrow, and the Civil Aviation Minister immediately departed for Ahmedabad to oversee the response. As the hours passed, the media coverage intensified. Television channels broadcast heartbreaking interviews with relatives who had gathered at airports in Ahmedabad and Kochi, their faces masks of anguish and disbelief as they waited for news that would never come. The passenger manifest was eventually released, and with it, the stories of the victims began to emerge. The Mehta family on their anniversary trip, the young software engineers, the doting grandmother. They were no longer anonymous passengers, but individuals with names, faces, and families now left to grapple with an unbearable loss. The single story of survival, that of Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, was reported with a mixture of awe and sorrow, a stark reminder of the 183 other lives, 173 on the plane and 10 on the ground, that had been extinguished. In the vacuum of official information, conspiracy theories and misinformation began to fester online. Some speculated about a terrorist bomb, while others blamed pilot error or poor maintenance. Every grainy video clip and eyewitness account was dissected and debated endlessly in digital forums. The public's thirst for answers was insatiable, fueled by a deep-seated need to understand how such a catastrophe could happen to a modern aircraft in perfect weather. This speculation put immense pressure on the authorities to provide clear and credible information. The government knew that transparency would be crucial to maintaining public trust in the aviation system. The government moved swiftly to quell the speculation and begin the formal process of discovery. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or DGCA, announced the formation of a high-level court of inquiry, to be led by a retired Supreme Court judge and assisted by top aviation experts from India and abroad. Their mandate was clear: to conduct a thorough, impartial investigation to determine the definitive cause of the crash. Their first priority was the recovery of the aircraft's black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. These two devices, engineered to survive extreme impacts and fire, held the key to unlocking the final, terrifying minutes of Flight AI171 and providing answers to a grieving nation. The recovery of the flight recorders was a critical breakthrough. Though damaged by the intense fire, the hardened memory units were intact. They were flown under high security to the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau's laboratory in New Delhi, where investigators began the delicate process of downloading and analyzing the data. The flight data recorder contained a wealth of information, a precise timeline of the aircraft's final minutes, tracking thousands of parameters from airspeed and altitude to control surface movements and engine performance. The cockpit voice recorder captured the sounds and conversations in the cockpit, providing a human context to the cold, hard data from the FDR. Together, they would tell the story of what went wrong. The initial findings were baffling. The data from the FDR confirmed the pilot's desperate struggle. It showed a series of uncommanded and extreme rudder movements that began during the takeoff roll and continued until the final impact. The CVR revealed the pilot's confusion and alarm as they fought an aircraft that seemed to have a will of its own. Their words, "What's happening?" and "We have a control problem," spoke volumes. There was no evidence of pilot error in the traditional sense. In fact, their inputs were consistent with attempts to correct the unexpected yawing. The engines were operating perfectly. The weather was not a factor. The investigators realized they were not looking at a mechanical failure, but something far more insidious. The investigation then turned to the aircraft's software logs, which had been partially recovered from the onboard maintenance computer. This is where the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Investigators cross-referenced the software version number with maintenance records and discovered the recent installation of the FACV 3.05B patch. They contacted the aircraft manufacturer, who, upon being presented with the flight data, began an urgent internal review. Their own simulations, recreating the exact conditions of AI171's departure, the specific crosswind component, the precise weight and balance, and the minute rudder inputs from the pilot, finally replicated the catastrophic failure in their labs. The ghost in the machine had a name. The final report from the Court of Inquiry, published 6 months later, was a damning indictment of systemic failure. It concluded that the primary cause of the crash was the faulty FACV 3.05B software, which contained a critical coding error. This error led to an uncontrollable rudder hardover event during takeoff. The report also highlighted contributing factors: the manufacturer's inadequate testing protocols for what was deemed a minor software update, and a regulatory framework that had not kept pace with the increasing complexity of avionics. There was no single person to blame. It was a failure of the entire system, a chain of events where a digital error, created by a programmer thousands of miles away, was allowed to propagate through the system and ultimately lead to disaster. The release of the final report sent shockwaves through the global aviation industry. The findings triggered immediate and sweeping changes. The aircraft manufacturer grounded thousands of A320neo aircraft worldwide until a new, rigorously tested software patch could be developed and installed. This massive undertaking was a logistical and financial nightmare, but it was essential to restore confidence. The crash of AI171 became a watershed moment, forcing manufacturers and regulators to fundamentally rethink their approach to software development, testing, and certification. The concept of a minor software update was abolished. Every line of code that could affect flight controls would now be subjected to the most stringent scrutiny imaginable. In India, the political and legal fallout was immense. The government faced intense public pressure for accountability. Families of the victims filed a class action lawsuit against the airline and the manufacturer. This legal battle, which played out in the public eye, highlighted the complex web of responsibility in modern aviation. In response to the tragedy, a group of victims' families, along with aviation safety advocates, formed a powerful activist group called Flight India. They became a relentless voice for reform, lobbying the government, questioning officials, and ensuring that the memory of those lost on AI171 would not be forgotten. Their advocacy was instrumental in pushing for meaningful and lasting change within India's aviation oversight bodies. The DGCA underwent a complete overhaul. The AI171 report exposed critical weaknesses in its ability to independently verify and certify complex foreign-made systems. New regulations were introduced, mandating more robust domestic oversight of all software and hardware modifications on aircraft operating in India. A new National Aviation Safety Board was established, modeled on the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, with greater powers and independence to investigate accidents and issue binding safety recommendations. The tragedy forced India to build a more resilient and proactive safety culture, moving from a reactive to a predictive model of risk management. The skies over India were becoming safer, forged in the fire of this immense loss. Years later, the scars of June 20, 2025 remain. In Megani Nagar, a quiet memorial park now stands where the market once was. A simple granite wall is inscribed with the 183 names of those who perished, a solemn tribute to the lives cut short. For the families, the grief never truly disappears, but it has been channeled into a powerful legacy. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, the sole survivor, eventually recovered from his physical injuries, though the emotional trauma would be a lifelong burden. He became a quiet but powerful advocate for aviation safety, his very existence a testament to the stakes involved. The tragedy of Flight AI171, born from a digital error, ultimately reinforced a timeless human lesson, that behind every complex system, there must be unwavering vigilance, accountability, and a profound respect for the lives it holds in its hands.